Hello viewers, welcome to your program. It is Economic Insight and I'm your host, Paul Kingsley. Now, in continuation with the ongoing report we are doing on infrastructure development in Nigeria, today we are taking a topical look at the various challenges affecting infrastructure developments in Nigeria. Now, with us on the program is the Managing Director, CEO of Dutum Company Limited. I'm talking of Ronsonwe Temitokwe. He's going to be giving us his own take on their contribution to the development of our infrastructure, looking at the challenges affecting mainly indigenous players in the industry. Sit back, relax. I'll be back after this time out. Thank you.
Dutum Company Limited was established in 1989 by our chairman, engineer Latunde Runshewe, and we've focused all our activities and services on providing, bridging the gap, infrastructure gap in the country, and that is in providing road construction services, housing construction services, bridges, and the whole gamut of infrastructural services in the country. Well, one of the things that we have observed over the years has been the predominance of foreign players in our infrastructure space. And in establishing Dutum, the drive was to prove that it was possible for indigenous companies to do as well and even better than our foreign compatriots. And so everything Dutum does is towards that goal of providing veritable services that can match with any international player anywhere in the world. Over the years, we've been at the forefront of providing infrastructural services across the country. Amongst there are loads of them, starting with Abuja here. Over the past 5 years or thereabout, we have provided bridges across the Federal Capital Territory. If you're familiar with the Federal Capital Territory, you see some of our projects close to Sheraton, some along Mabushi Road, providing alternative means of crossing the road for pedestrians. I mean, if you see a lot of challenges that pedestrians have crossing our major highways in the FCT, Dutum has been one of the companies who have been entrusted with the responsibility of constructing pedestrian bridges, and we've done quite a handful of them in the Federal Capital Territory. Apart from that, we're presently close to completing a 75-kilometer road that transverses between Oyo and Osun State, precisely the Ogbomoso-Osogbo Road. That is almost complete, and that is a major road providing easy transportation for agricultural produce along that corridor. A lot of commercial activity goes on in that area. Apart from that, we've done a few commercial buildings and a lot of educational buildings. We built the Integrated Tax Office of the Federal Inland Revenue Service in Osun State that is already completed. We've also done a number of roads for state governments, Kogi State, Osun State. Apart from this, a few commercial buildings and educational buildings. For example, the Senate building at Covenant University was also constructed by Dutum. In the same vein, the college building at Landmark University. We've also built a hangar, a commercial hangar. It's a double hangar. It's one of the first double hangars in Nigeria, being occupied by Dominion Air. Is at the international wing. It's a massive hangar where planes are parked. So Dutum has been at the forefront. Driving forces is that we don't believe that there's any piece of engineering that is impossible for us to execute. If it is, if we get the design, we get the drawings, we will put that structure on ground for any client. And that is our motto and our driving force. Once you have the institutional and managerial capacity, deployment becomes like plug and play, right? So today, I believe, Dutum has done projects in the billions now, 3, 4, 5. But the same way we delivered on a 5 billion project, with the level of learning that we have done, we can deliver on a 10, 20, 30 billion size project. All that needs to happen is for the government to make a deliberate effort to say, who are the key indigenous players here? Come for a meeting. What are your challenges? How can we push you? How can we make sure that in the next 20 years, we're calling you guys the big players and not still calling the Asians and the Europeans the big player in our market? It has to be deliberate. It has to be deliberate policy, deliberate effort directed towards making that happen. So in terms of capacity, I believe we have the capacity to do what a lot of our foreign compatriots are doing. And if we're given the opportunity to do it, we'll be able to prove that. Now, let me tell you what I feel would help in solving some of the challenges that we have as indigenous companies. I said earlier, if I raise a certificate for payment, it could take me up to 6 months, sometimes 1 year, sometimes even 18 months to 2 years to get paid. Now, one of the ways to solve that is for the federal government to create a fund called Infrastructure Fund. And I'll tell you how I suggest that will work. If I, as a contractor, have done work for the federal government and I have a certificate of 100 million, I should be able to go to either the Central Bank of Nigeria or the Infrastructure Bank or another agency that the federal government creates and take that certificate to them. This is this is money. Now, give me this money for me to go and continue work. I don't mind if you charge me 2% or 5% or something, but what does that do? Then between you, a federal government agency, and the Federal Ministry of Power Works and Housing, you can sort yourselves out. What does this do? It allows work to continue. It means I don't have to leave site. It means I don't have to lay off staff. It means I don't have to spend 10 years on a 2-year contract. It means that our roads will get delivered on time. It means that the quality will improve. It means that we'll be able to deliver at lower cost. If the federal government is able to come up with this product and we are ready to sit down, because we are in the field, we are the ones that know where we're feeling the pinch, invite a stakeholders meeting, call us to a meeting, let us create the product. If it means, if it means going to our development partners and saying, look, we have this huge problem, give us a few $1 billion, let us put it in a fund. You can put your managers there to manage how the funds are expended. But don't let the guys in the field suffer because of our own problems. Let us create this fund. And once I have a certified, certificate from the federal government of Nigeria, I can take it to that bank. You give me the equivalent of that money, you charge me 2% or whatever you want to charge, and then you sort yourselves out as federal government agencies so I can continue and so that I concentrate on my primary responsibility, which is to provide infrastructure and deliver on the promises that I've given by signing an agreement with the federal government. That is one side. The other side is there are certain roads and infrastructure in the country that are commercially viable. I was glad when I heard the Minister of Power Works and Housing talk about PPP models, tolling and all of that coming back. That is the only way everywhere in the world. Go to Asia, go to Europe, go to the Americas. There are major roads that get tolled. Those toll fees are used to maintain the roads and expand the roads where needed. We cannot do without that. We need to go back to that. But the policy, the laws that are required for private sector money to come in need to be passed. Nigeria needs to be seen as a country that is reliable, trustworthy, and that the rule of law works. If we can do all of that, foreign money will come into our infrastructure space, and then we can begin to be able to be on the journey to bridge the infrastructure deficit. Let me tell you something. With government money, we will never be able to bridge the deficit, never. But with a strong partnership between the private sector and the public sector, we can begin the journey in that path. I mean, there are a few challenges, but I'll start with the most common one, and it almost sounds cliche, but funding is a major challenge for indigenous players in the country. And I'll try to break it down in the course of this interview. Now, when we engage some of the foreign companies that come into Nigeria to compete for our infrastructure projects, they have an unfair advantage. For example, some of our competitors that come in from China, if I'm going to be specific, come in with a huge backing from their government that provides funding support for equipment, for personnel, and all of that. So they show up with a bag full of cash, and they're here to compete with us. So the moment they get an award, they're able to move to site the next day and get the job moving, even without getting any money from anywhere. However, we indigenous companies on the other side do not have the financial muscle to be able to move at the same pace. So what needs to be done? I mean, something has to be done. There has to be a way to deliberately tilt the equation in the favor of the indigenous companies. If they are coming in, the foreigners are coming in with dollars at almost 0% interest, and they're able to get the job done. We on the other side, if I approach a bank, first of all, I won't get it. And if I was to get it, it will be at 30%. It is impossible for me to execute a project collecting 30% funding from the bank, because can I even be sure that I'm going to make a 30% profit on the project, not to talk of collecting money at 30%. So funding is a major challenge. Apart from that, huge delays in payment, which is a big problem for the federal government and the nation in general. If I do some work now, before I would expect to receive my payment, realistically today, it won't be less than 6 months. So what that means is that, and it's not the fault of, the Ministry of Works and all the team there, they're doing the best that they can, but the country is in their need of funding. It is obvious that the efforts are being made, but they can't about do enough to bridge the challenges we face. So back to my train of thought. So I raise a certificate and it takes 6 months for me to be paid. So what am I supposed to be doing during that time? So what happens many of the times is by the time I work for a few more months and I run out of resources because nobody is going to provide me with a buffer during that time, what then happens is that I leave that site. I leave the site, and it means that I have to lay off some staff because I can't continue paying staff salaries while there's no work going on and there's no money to pay them. So I leave the site, I lay off some staff, and then we're waiting for payments to come through. So now, by the time I'm paid, I go back to the site first. Mobilizing and demobilizing to site costs money. By the time I'm back on site, some of the things I've done have gone bad because they've been done halfway. So they've gone bad, and then I have to repair, and then, so this is a huge problem. One, it escalates the cost of doing construction, and two, it increases the length of time. So if you're given a road right now in Nigeria to construct, maybe it's supposed to be 24 months, you're probably going to be there for the next 7 to 10 years. That is the reality of where we are right now. But we are determined as a company to continue to do our part to support the country, to support this is the only country we have. And there's a huge deficit, there's a huge gap. So, people ask, how do you have all these challenges and you still stay in there? Despite the challenges, we cannot give up. We still have to stay in there, do our bit, and begin to expect that things get better. Apart from the funding challenges and all of that, of course, we also have some challenges with manpower, skilled manpower. We need the skills to deliver the project. So this is why sometimes you find indigenous companies employing foreigners, having expatriates on their staff, on their personnel. We want to have skilled personnel locally that can do some of these things. And this is one of the areas we can address this, is for the federal government to come up with a policy that makes it compulsory for any foreign contractor to partner with local contractors in executing any project. And what will that do? It will create an opportunity to transfer skills to our local workforce, so that when they leave, they don't leave with everything. We would have learned something in the process of executing that project in partnership with the foreign contractor. Like I said earlier, one of the challenges definitely has to do with manpower. While, yes, there are some gaps in our project management capacity within the indigenous space, but the fact that there's a gap doesn't mean that you should throw it away. It means that you need to chart a path to show the indigenous companies how to do it. And that is why I just suggested my proposal is make it mandatory for the big players, the foreign players, to partner with the local players. And it's not just for the purpose of enjoying the financial benefits, but for the purpose of also transferring the knowledge, the capacity. There's no amount of training you want to go for in a classroom that can replace the hands-on experience of being on the field. So if the minister, as he has rightfully said, has identified a gap, then we need to find a solution to that gap. And the solution is not to chase us away. The solution is to bring us closer and find a way for us to learn from those who are clearly far ahead of us. And the only way to do that is to make it compulsory for the foreign players, the big players, to put some of the smaller indigenous players on their wings for the purpose of transferring knowledge and exchanging ideas. See, if you have a hole as huge as the Atlantic Ocean, just as an analogy, and you come with a bucket and you pour it into that hole, are you going to feel the impact? That is exactly what is going on. The deficit we have is so huge that the annual provisions being made for infrastructure cannot even begin to scratch the surface. So yes, there have been releases, but the releases cannot get anywhere. The releases cannot even, in my opinion, solve 5% of the challenges we have. That is even the existing challenges, not to talk of taking on new ones. And what I mean by that is the existing debt profile in the ministries, the federal ministries that are in charge of infrastructure, that is the Ministry of Power, Works and Housing, are so huge that even if you keep on providing what has been provided for the next 10 years, we're never going to be able to fill the gap. So we have to become creative in how we fund infrastructure in the country. And there are a lot of things that come to play in this. I guess in the course of our interview, I'll be able to throw some more light on some of the ideas that I believe need to be implemented to try and solve the challenges. Well, the gaps are enormous. And what I believe is that when you get into any country, the first thing you see is infrastructure. If you arrive in a new country, first, the infrastructure beginning from the airport, that is infrastructure. You leave the airport, you get on the roads, that is infrastructure. You leave the roads, you get to your hotel, whatever, you're talking about power. All of these are infrastructure. So infrastructure is critical in the image making of any country. And if we can get infrastructure right, I believe that Nigeria will be ranked amongst the Committee of Nations very soon. A few things, when it comes to housing, you have to break it down into the causes, the root cause of our challenges. Now, in providing for housing, there are two major aspects that are very important. You have the supply side and you have the demand side. The supply side is where people like us come in, the providers of the service. So we are the ones that go there and provide the houses with supply. The other side is the demand side, which is the side that has to do with the buyers, those who are going to buy the houses. So when you talk about the deficit, we need to be very clear. Are we talking about a demand deficit or a supply deficit? Now, the whole sector has to work effectively together. It's like a catch-22. If you provide houses and there are no people to buy them, you have a problem. At the same time, if you don't have money to build the houses, then we still have a problem. So we need funding, but we need funding on both sides of the spectrum. We need funding to supply the houses, and we need funding provided for those who are going to buy the houses. So let me give you an example. If today I go into the field, let's use FCT as an example, and I want to provide housing in FCT. By the time I'm done with, let's say, a 2 or 3 bedroom flat or bungalow, commercially, I'm going to land at around 15 million naira as a developer. And that's even putting it very mild and average. Now, by the time I put my markup, I might be wanting to sell for about 20 million naira. Now, which means whoever is going to be buying from me must either be able to pay 20 million naira because there are no mortgages, right? So how many people in Nigeria today can afford to pay 20 million naira for a house? We just have to be realistic. So the solution on that side is we need to strengthen our mortgage institutions. They are hugely underfunded. Hugely underfunded. And once that is done, if the mortgage institutions can get well funded, they can begin to provide mortgages for those who would buy. At the same time, we need to also strengthen the capacity of the developers to develop. Everybody has to work together. It's not going to just be the government. I believe the key role the government can play in housing is, well, maybe 2 or 3. Number 1, provide access to land for developers. Number 2, create an enabling environment for the developers. Number 3, provide a fund that developers can access in order for them to develop. If government is able to do this, government has no business being the ones building the houses. That is my opinion. There is no way government can award contracts to fill the 17 million. In fact, I don't even think government can award contracts to fill 100,000 houses in a year. it cannot happen. Why? The bottlenecks are too huge. I just told you it takes us 3 to 6 months to get paid. So if I'm a developer that the government is giving a contract to build houses, if I do work for 3 months, I wait 6 months to get paid. Then I go back to site, do work for another 3 months. So averagely, maybe I'll be delivering 50 houses in 2 years. When are we going to finish? So there has to be a synergy between the government and private players, and funding for serious-minded developers, funding for the demand side, which is for those who are going to buy it. If we can find a good synergy between these two, I believe we can begin to solve the housing problems in Nigeria. Well, my advice to young Nigerians, being myself an entrepreneur, is for young Nigerians to take on entrepreneurship. Now we talk about challenges all the time. Now what is business? Business, in my opinion, is solving people's problems profitably. That is, finding a solution to problems in a profitable manner. So young Nigerians, sit down. It is tough, we agree, but you need to elevate yourself above the toughness, above the hardship, and think, observe. Every problem needs a solution. And if you find a solution to people's problems, people will pay you for it. So sit down, look at all the problems we complain about, and begin to try to find meaningful solutions to solving them. I know it is easier said than done, but we have to start the journey. So sit down, think, observe, read, study. This is big. This is a big problem. We have a situation where all of the reading young Nigerians are doing now is on Facebook, is on Instagram. Nobody's reading anymore. The internet is huge. It provides you with unlimited free resources. You won't believe how much resources are on it. Anything you want to learn, you can learn it for free. There's a young man who I met recently, and in the course of conversation, he works with a friend of mine as a programmer. And in the course of conversation, I said, "Young man, you're very good at this. What did you study?" He said, "I studied political science." I said, "Wow, that's interesting. A political scientist who is now a programmer. How?" He said, "Everything I know, I learned on YouTube." While everybody was sitting down complaining, there's no job, there's no this, there's no that, the little money I had, I used it to buy data. And I learned how to program on YouTube. Now this young man is employed, and he also has little side businesses he's doing as a programmer. That is what our young guys need to do. This time you're spending on Facebook, on this, on that, sit down, the same YouTube you're on, learn new skills, develop yourself, and have something that you can use in exchange for value. That is the only way out. And that is actually the only way out for the country as a whole, so that you begin to contribute your part. Stop waiting for government. Government is not able to solve, we are too plenty for government to solve our problems. So imagine if government was to give everybody in Nigeria 1 naira, we're 170 million. What would 1 naira do? That's 170 million naira. It's a long journey. Take responsibility for your life, take responsibility for your destiny. I'm not saying it easy, but we have to start the journey somewhere. All right, well, like you introduced me earlier, my name is Temitope Roshewe, the Managing Director of Dutum Company Limited, and a few other businesses, but Dutum being the purpose for this interview. I've been on the journey of entrepreneurship for a long time, always looking for opportunities to add value to the society in a profitable manner. That is all that this is about. And listen to this, we are determined that as long as God gives us the grace and the opportunity arises, we are going to give the foreign construction companies and infrastructure providers a run for their money. In the next 20 years, when you're going to be mentioning the huge infrastructure providers in the country, take note of that name Dutum, because it's going to be ranking up there. We are going to compete with these guys. Government needs to help us, but whether they help us or not, we're going to give them a good fight for their money. So watch out.